Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio, and it's 9:30 p.m. Calgary, Alberta time, and it's Wednesday, May the 12th. I am so happy to be here. It's Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is up to us. This is a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and I'm just happy to be able to continue to do these shows and thank everybody for your support and all my friends who are here with me, every time they can be, and I just really appreciate it. And yeah, it's just so awesome. We're going to continue on talking about domestic violence and the issues surrounding domestic violence and abuse, and the issues, how it affects children. Also, looking into getting a safety plan in place if you're a person out there who's listening to the show and you're living in a home with domestic violence and abuse, and you're just not sure how to go about, getting help. Right? There's some great websites out there full of all kinds of good information for people who are facing this horrible situation in their lives, right? And there is ways you can protect yourself, and there's things that you can do to help yourself, to keep yourself alive, really, and your children alive, right? So important. And so I just think we can't talk about this stuff enough. That's why I keep on doing these shows. I just want to be one more voice out there, and just to keep saying, we have to be looking out for the people in our lives. We have to be able to protect our children and ourselves. And so it's so important to know that there is help out there, and just to keep looking and keep searching for that help, and keep really, just to continue to realize that we do deserve to have a good life, and every child deserves the right to live a happy and decent life, and not have to live with abuse, and as children really, they can't protect themselves, right? So it's up to us, and we really have to take this on, and that's why I'm so happy to be able to do these shows. And so yeah, we'll just get started in this. I know it's not a professional show. I say this on every show because I believe that everyone has the right to know the truth. I don't hold any counseling certificates or therapist certificates. I'm just a person who does Blog Talk Radio. I'm very interested in child rights. I fight for child rights. I study part-time at MRU. I'm in between courses actually now for quite a while because I couldn't afford to continue on taking the courses. So I sort of had to sit at least 2 semesters out now, which is unfortunate, but that's all right because I continue to study, and as I'm doing these blog talk shows, that's what I'm doing, is really the research and looking into the situation and looking into what's going on out there, and even with current events and whatnot with Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and this is just, I'm so happy to be, let me tell you, it's a great opportunity and a great honor really to be a part of the group and to be a part of such an awesome group, a team of people who are out there fighting to stop child abuse every day, 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There's somebody out there, and then all these other groups, advocating to stop child abuse. There's so many people out there who are really standing united with us. We're all together on the same team as far as I'm concerned, and it's all about stopping child abuse, protecting children. And I fight for child rights, and that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So to stop child abuse, right? And so that's why I'm doing this show. I don't hold any certificates or degrees or anything like that. I just pass on information that I find on the web that I think is helpful and that other people might gain some knowledge from it, and gives them some idea of where to get this information, right, so that they can look at it themselves. You can always go back and look at the articles that I'm looking at and check it out for yourself, right? It's so important that we get involved. And, if you're a young person under the age of 18, I ask that you find an adult who is an older person who you trust, like a parent. I hope you have a parent who cares really what you're doing and what you're listening to. And if you don't, then you need, because I know sadly that so many people so many youngsters don't have parents who are there for them, right? So then you can find a counselor, a teacher, guidance counselor, a coach, someone who who's trustworthy and who has proven themselves to be trustworthy, to listen to the show and give them the link and see if it's okay for you to listen to it. And the reason being is that there's a lot of adult content on here. I cover every topic regarding abuse, whether it's child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, you name it, child exploitation. I'm pretty much talking about all of it on here because it's important that we do talk about this. But if you're a really young person, you might not have heard a whole lot about abuse, and you might not know a whole lot about the topics, and it might be kind of upsetting, and it could be that you might have a lot of questions. and not know where to get the answers, and that can be very frustrating. So I think if you're a young person and you're just not really sure, where to get the information and help, it would be helpful to have someone there with you listening to the show, and then they can help you decide whether you should be listening to it or not, right? Because I don't know where where the actual Blog Talk players are anymore, right? And they could be placed just anywhere because you can grab the link and put them on all the websites, right? So I don't know where these players are anymore, and so that's why it's very important if you're a young person. You should have someone who knows what you're doing online at all times if you want to keep yourself safe, and out of the hands and keep yourself protected from child sexual predators, right? So important. There's a lot of crazy people out there trying to get a hold of children online. And so you have to be aware of that. They can pose as people your own age and say that they like to do the same things you do. They like to watch movies and, go to the mall and skateboard and all this stuff, right? And then they want you to meet them somewhere, and then they get you to meet them someplace, and you think it's some 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid who wants to go hang out and have fun, and it turns out to be a child sexual predator. And you just don't want that to happen to you. It's happening to children, happening to young people all over the world. It's especially, we're seeing reports of it now in the United States and Canada. So you want to keep yourself protected and get that information on how to keep yourself safe online, and to really be careful what you're doing online, especially in chat rooms. And don't give out your real name. Don't use your real name on your computer. And don't give them any personal information whatsoever, your address, your phone number. Don't allow them to phone you, because if they'll have caller ID on the other end, and so if they get you to phone them, they'll have your number. So that's the whole issue. There's ways you can protect yourself, and we cannot talk about them enough. You need to make sure that you get the information, right? So important. So we're going to continue on looking at this article I found on the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence website. And that's www.acadv.org. And it's just a good article, really, regarding the effects of domestic violence on children, right? And we were looking at giving children love and care on Monday night. And I wanted to continue on looking at age-specific indicators of how domestic violence affects children. It's just the next portion of this article, right? And it says here, child victim witness of domestic violence, age-specific indicators, infants. This is what will happen. It sort of has these are the different effects that it will have on infants. Is basic need for attachment is disrupted. Routines around feeding, sleeping are disturbed. Right? If this infant is growing up in a home with domestic violence and a lot of abuse, everyone's fighting. The parents are fighting, and a lot of noise and a lot of things, violence and things getting broken and thrown around. And obviously they're going to have trouble sleeping. There's not going to be a routine for feeding these poor babies, right? Injuries while caught in a crossfire, that can happen. Irritability or inconsolable crying, right? And I mean, who wouldn't cry in a situation like that? You know what I mean? I grew up in a home full of domestic violence, and I was crying all the time. And people thought I was a big crybaby, and they actually they would tell my parents, "Oh, somebody should just smack that kid, get her to stop crying." So of course then my mom would smack me, but the reason I was crying is because I was being abused. And so every time, like, I had a lot of emotional difficulties as a young child because there was a lot of violence in the home, right? And so I would quite often be pouting or crying. And then people would come to the house and they'd be like, "What's the matter with her? Somebody should just smack her and give her some, a discipline," right? So then my mom would beat me, and they thought it was great because I was getting some discipline, right? But I was already being battered in every way. So that's the whole issue with that, right? Kids, if you see a child who's just a baby and a child who's just crying all the time and irritable and with injuries that you just are unexplainable, you know what I mean? Gashes and bruises and whatnot, that's a sign of abuse, and you do want to make sure you check on that, right? You just never know if it's someone in your family who's got a small child and they're living in the home with domestic violence, like a family member. You really have to check and make sure the child's not being abused. So important, right? Frequent illness, difficulty sleeping. This is what infants will go through. Possibility, right? Diarrhea, developmental delays, lack of responsiveness. They just shut down, right? It's horrible, absolutely horrible. Preschool. This is what happens to children who are preschool age. Somatic or psychosomatic complaints, regression. They'll go back to kind of like infantile behavior, irritability, fearful of being alone. extreme separation anxiety, developmental delays, and sympathetic toward the mother. If there's a lot of abuse, from the other partner toward the mother, then of course the child's going to feel sympathy for the mother, right? And it says elementary age here, facilitate between being eager to please and being hostile, verbal about home life, this is if they're growing up in a domestic violence situation, right? Developmental delays, externalized behavior problems, inadequate social skill development, gender role modeling creates conflict and confusion. And yeah, that's because, if they see that the father abusing if like for instance, if a young boy sees his father abusing his mother, then he thinks that that's the way he's to behave, right? A lot of times, and takes on that role. That it's a learned behavior, right? And quite often that's what happens, and then they pass it on to their children, right? And it just keeps going, and that's the cycle of abuse, right? And even women, like my mother was abused as a child, and terribly, horribly by my grandmother, and who abused all of her children, but especially my mom. My mom was the oldest, and she took it out on my mom, and my mom passed it on to me and all of the 7 siblings that I had. So I'm the last of 7. So we all suffered because of that. My mom didn't break the cycle, and unfortunately, but lots of us did. There's some of us that did, right? So it's so important that if you were abused, that you do not go on to abuse your children, because a lot of people think that if a person who was abused as a child has children, that they will automatically abuse them, which is really not true. A lot of survivors who have survived child abuse do not go on to abuse their children. They've done lots and lots of studies on that, and it's just a misconception, right? There's a lot of good parents out there who were abused as children, but it can happen, and that's the thing, right? We have to actually, if we were abused as children, we have to make sure that we don't go on to abuse our children, right? It's just so important. And pre-adolescence, this is what can happen behaviorally and emotionally to them if they're growing up in a violent home and with a lot of domestic violence. Behavior problems become more serious, increased internalized behavior, difficulties, depression, isolation, withdrawal. So they can either internalize behaviors and become depressed, right, withdrawing within themselves, emotional difficulties, shame, fear, confusion, and rage, poor social skills, developmental delays, and protection of mother sees her as weak. Either they're going to really protect her or they're going to see her as weak, right? Guarded or secretive about the family, because they don't want anybody to know that they're living in a home full of domestic violence and that all this terrible stuff is happening, right? And a lot of times they might be being threatened, that can happen. And like my mom used to threaten me, and she'd say she would kill me if I ever told anybody what was going on in our home. And I one time told, and of course then when she found out, of course, because that lady went down to intervene for me, when I came home like 5 days later, my mom had me up against the wall saying, if you ever tell anybody again, I will kill you. So I didn't really take her threats seriously, but she could have killed me. She was a very strong, powerful woman, and she could have killed me many times. So that's the whole issue. I knew that she was capable of killing me. I just didn't think that she would do it. I felt it was more of just a threat, really, not a real thing, you know what I mean? Even though she very well could have killed me, and almost did a couple of times. So that's the whole issue, right? People threaten their children all the time, and it's absolutely horrible, and it's really wrong, and it's very damaging to a child, right? Adolescence. Internalized and externalized behavior problems can become extreme and dangerous. Drug, alcohol, truancy, gangs, sexual acting out, pregnancy, runaway, suicidal. It puts these young people in a really bad position, right? I know because I was there and I grew up in it, and I started doing drugs at a very young age, hanging around with especially in my teen years, like later teen years. I was hanging around with a lot of people who were doing a lot of drugs, and there was a lot of gang members involved in some of it, and it was really quite crazy. And I wasn't necessarily suicidal at that point, but I was very much into doing activities that would put my life at risk, you know what I mean? That I just didn't care if I lived or died, so I would just do these crazy things, and it's just bad. It really sets kids up to have an extremely bad adolescence. And that's why it's so important that, if you have children and you're in a domestic violence situation, that you make sure that they get help, Once you get yourself some help and get yourself safe and get out of that domestic abuse, you want to then, if you have children, make sure that your children get help. It's so important because then they need to learn how to go on and have a good life, and if they weren't shown that as children, then they'll just carry on, they'll just carry on with what they know, which is violence and hurting each other. That's why you see a lot of this gang activity and runaways and, teen suicides and pregnancies and, kids on the street, doing crazy things. Some of them come from really good homes, and that's true, and then lots of others don't. So you can't lump them all into one group. There are some that come from perfectly good homes, and for whatever reason, that lifestyle is attractive to them. You know what I mean? But there's a lot that don't come from good homes and are on the street, not really by choice, but because it's safer. And I used to think that the streets were safer than my own home, and so I was out quite a bit, running around, especially in my teen years, early teens and mid-teens, just out running around all the time, middle of the night, or just going wherever, sleeping wherever, friends' homes or whatever, and ending up at parties, not knowing where it was, not knowing what part of the city I was in, and really didn't care because I didn't care if I lived or died, so it didn't really matter. But I felt safer out on the streets than I did at home, so that's really bad, and that's what happens to a lot of young people, right? Dating, relationships may reflect violence learned or witnessed in the home, right? So that's why we see a lot of this teen dating abuse, and they almost have, turned it into some sort of a fad type thing, teen dating abuse. The whole issue is that teens do abuse each other, right? And it's been going on forever. It's not something that's new. It's just that people are just now starting to talk about it. It's a serious issue, and it can happen because if they've grown up in an abusive home and they see that this is how they spent their lives, living their lives this way, and then they get into a relationship in their teens with someone, a boyfriend, girlfriend, or same sex or whatever, there can be a lot of abuse in that. You know what I mean? And so it's just now actually sort of being brought to the forefront of people's attention, but it's actually been going on forever. So there's nothing new under the sun. You know what I mean? All this stuff has been going on for a long, long time. So, since time began, people have been hurting each other really since the beginning. So, it's just horrible, absolutely horrible. And it's a shame that people have to carry on those abusive behaviors. That's why I would suggest everybody make sure you get some help if you grew up that way, because you don't want to continue on that way. Life can be really good, and if you weren't ever shown that as a child, then you need to know that there is help out there, and there's a good opportunity to have a good life, but it won't happen unless you start the ball rolling. It won't happen unless you decide, hey, I'm going to stop this cycle, I'm going to get some help, and I'm going to have a good life. You know what I mean? So important. And, if you're an adult who's being abused in a situation that, your partner is abusing you or whatever, so many times they're beaten down so badly, whether it's emotional, physical, psychological, verbal abuse, right, just beats people down. They end up with no self-esteem, really low, so not feeling worth anything, like self-worthlessness, and also no confidence, because they're being told over and over again that they won't be able to make it and that they can't do anything right. I mean, I heard all that growing up as a child, right? But I know that there's abusive partners do that to their other partner, right, to wear them down. See, that's what it is. It's very psychological, this abuse, right? And so, you just have to know yourself that you do count, you do matter, you do deserve to have a good life. Well, we'll look at some statistics here, and it says each year an estimated, now this article was written a while back. Now, I don't know, I can't even find the date on it. It might be on their website, but they didn't put it actually on this article. So, the statistics might have changed, but even so, let's just take a look at these statistics right here from, this is the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence, right? Each year, an estimated 3.3 million children are exposed to violence against their mothers or female caretakers by family members. And that was taken from the American Psychological Association Violence in the Family report of the APA Presidential Task Force on Violence in the Family, 1996. But in 1996, 3.3 million children are exposed to violence against their mothers or female caretakers by family members each year. That's too many. 3.3 million. Can you imagine that? That's crazy. Studies show that child abuse occurs in 30 to 60% of family violence cases that involve families with children. So if there's family violence going on, 30 to 60% of those families will be involved in abusing their children, right? So that's 30 to 60%. I mean, what is that? That's crazy. It's probably closer to the 60, because children end up paying the price for most of the abuse, right? So It's horrible. It really needs to stop. A survey of 6,000 American families found that 50% of men who assault their wives also abuse their children. That was in 1989 from Pagelo's The Forgotten Victims, Children of Domestic Violence. And that's 6,000 American families found that 50% of men who assault their wives also abuse their children. It says here, research shows that 80 to 90% of children living in homes where there is domestic violence are aware of the violence. And that's from the same Pagelo's Effects of Domestic Violence on Children, 1990. So, yeah, 80 to 90% of children living in homes where there is domestic violence are aware of the violence. So that means they are seeing it. They're actually witnessing it, and it's not just going on behind the bedroom door, with the door closed. This would be out in the family room or the kitchen or in the car or whatever. So the parents wouldn't, or the caregivers, or whoever the parents are in this situation, they aren't trying to hide it from the children, right? They're witnessing it, and that's a fact. That's what happened in our case, right? We witnessed it and we saw it, right? A number one predictor of child abuse is women abuse, and that's from Stark and Flitcraft, Women at Risk: A Feminist Perspective on Child Abuse. A number one predictor of child abuse is women abuse. I guess so, if the mother's being abused, then you can pretty much figure that the children are being abused, right? And we see that in the papers so often, right? And the mother's usually being abused, and then the children are being abused, but because the mother's being abused, they don't report the abuse because they don't want to turn their partner in, so the child suffers, right? The more severe the abuse of the mother, the worse the child abuse. That's from an article from Boker, Arbitel, and McFerrin on the relationship between wife beating and child abuse from 1988. So see, they've pulled up some pretty good resources here. You can go to this website and check it out. And some 80% of child fatalities within the family are attributable to fathers or father surrogates. So we see that in the paper all the time. In families where the mother is assaulted by the father, daughters are at risk of sexual abuse 6.51 times greater than girls in non-abusive families. Well, that's a given, right? If the father has no respect for the mother, they're not going to have any respect for the daughters, you know what I mean? And that's a fact. A child's exposure to the father abusing the mother is the strongest risk factor for transmitting violent behavior from one generation to the next. And that's just the whole issue, right? That's how that cycle just continues on. And male children who witness the abuse of mothers by fathers are more likely to become men who batter in adulthood than those male children from homes free of violence. Now they've done lots and lots of studies on that. And they did find that, if a young boy witnesses a lot of abuse towards his mother, or abuse really towards anyone, they take that on as a behavioral thing, and they tend to do that in their own lives, And it's just a learned behavior. It's horrible. They grow up thinking that that's the way they have to behave, that their own father did that, or, they saw their uncle doing it, whoever was bringing up that child, right? And they think that's normal behavior. See, that's why that's a real problem, and that's why the cycle of abuse is so hard to break, because people only really learn what they know. You know what I mean? It's like what you've lived through, that's what you know. So it's like if you grow up, for 10 years in a home where there's all kinds of abuse, then you just think that that's normal, unless somebody tells you that it's not normal. And thank God people told me that the abuse that I was living in and suffering in was not normal. You know what I mean? I wouldn't want to be going through life thinking that that was normal. But there's so many people that are, and that's just horrible. You can get a safety plan at various places. A safety plan, you can pull one up at www.ncadv.org. That's the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence.org. NCADV, and you can also get one safety plan from www.domesticviolence.org, and these safety plans are awesome. They really are. They really give you some good tips. If you feel like your life is being threatened and your life is in danger, and you just seriously think you better be getting out of the home, there are ways you can sort of start getting the ball rolling, and to get a personal safety plan. And it's so important that you do that, because you could save your life. You could save your children's lives, right? And so I would highly recommend everybody take a look at this. And it's quite interesting. I found it very interesting when I found these safety plans. I started reading through them, and I'm like, what good advice. Awesome. They say, first of all, if you're being abused and you believe that your life is being threatened, you can tell it's just very violent abuse. Don't go into rooms like the kitchen where there's weapons. Don't go into rooms like the bathroom where there's no exits. you have to think about all this stuff ahead of time, right, if you want to save your life. And you need to have somebody who knows the situation on the outside, who's a supporter, who can help you, because if you have someone who's going to be there for you, then you can set it up that if you phone them and you say a certain code word, then they will phone 911 so that your abuser will not know that you're phoning 911. That is if you can even get to the phone, right? Now, the whole problem being is that quite often you can't even get to the phone, but what I think the best thing to do is just be prepared, right, and start to think about how you would get away if you were in that situation, if your life is being threatened, right? It's so important. You want to protect yourself from, you don't want to be a statistic, showing up in the paper, that everyone's going to read that, here's another, sadly, another tragic victim of domestic violence. Someone who's taken someone's life in a domestic violence assault. And that's so sad. I see those in the paper all the time, and my heart just breaks for those people. I'm thinking, how come they didn't get any help? I mean, what happened that they did not know that they could get help? And it's not the greatest help, obviously, because a lot of times people end up trying to, they have to go to shelters and whatnot, domestic violence shelters and women's shelters, battered women's shelters. And, of course, that's not the greatest thing, right? But it's better than dying. It's better than ending up in a pine box, you know what I mean? You have a chance then, right? You have a second chance. And I think it's worth it. I really do. And that's the whole issue, right? These people, it's like so sad that they didn't get any help, and it was just too late, and they're just killed at the hands of their partner, who was supposed to love them and protect them, right? And then the children a lot of times are killed as well with the mother. And sometimes, you see, men are victims of domestic violence too, believe it or not. A lot of people don't like to acknowledge that because there's way more abuse against women from men. But the whole issue is that you can't look at things black and white, because then you're just ignoring another very important part of the whole situation of abuse, which is there's abuse against men as well. And men suffer in domestic violence situations as well. I've seen it firsthand. I'm not naming names, but I know personally someone who was in a domestic violence situation, and it was horrible. And I also have other friends who I know who personally have been who are men who were in domestic violence situations where their wives were abusing them. And the thing is people think, oh, that's funny, but they wouldn't hit their wives back. So their wife would attack them physically and every other way, verbally, emotionally, psychologically, you name it, but even physically attack them, and they could not hit the wife back because it wasn't part of their psyche. They could not hit their wife. And so, people looked down on them, and they were like, you can't be kidding, you can't be serious, here, you're letting your wife, beat you up, and that's not a very manly way to be. And of course this person just didn't want to cause any abuse, right? So thank God they got out of the relationship, but I'm telling you, men are abused as well. And 1 out of 6 men or 6 or 7 men will have been victims of child sexual abuse under the age of 18. Now, that just tells you men are abused as well, and it's so sad because so many times they don't have anywhere to go to get help, And there is some great stuff on online chat groups or online survivors for the male survivors of domestic violence and child abuse and stuff. I would encourage all men who have been through this and who have been abused to reach out and find somebody to talk to about it and not suffer in silence, right? Horrible. No one should have to suffer in silence, right? So make sure you get a safety plan for yourself. You want to protect yourself and save your life and save your children's lives, right? And there's so many organizations out there. You can look in the front of your phone book, and there'll probably be listing in your local area for domestic violence hotlines. You can remain anonymous and talk to someone. If you're just having a hard time and you think, oh, I need to talk to somebody about this, there's hotlines out there that are manned by people that really care and actually can give you some good advice on how to keep yourself safe and what to do and how to get some support, right? You don't want to be suffering along in this by yourself. And that's the whole issue, right? There's people out there who are willing to help. You're not alone in this. And there's all kinds of people out there who have lived through it, been through it, are free from it, and now they want to help other people. And that's the awesome part of that, right? So important. We've got a minute left, and I'm so happy that you could tune in. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. Check out our website, http://dreamcatchersforAbusedChildren.com, and that's a great website. I'm a survivor of child abuse as well, and I found that website very healing. Before I was just so blessed to be able to take on this role as the Canada Regional Director, I was on the website checking it out as a survivor, and I thought, what a beautiful website for survivors of child abuse, very healing for me. But Not only that, more importantly, it's so important. There's great information on there regarding signs and symptoms of child abuse, how to report child abuse properly so that the child doesn't end up back in the home. If you don't report child abuse properly, you can mess it up for a child and they can end up back in the home, right? Or they won't be able to convict the abuser. So there's very important information on there. And you do want to get that information. Learn the signs and symptoms and learn how to report abuse. And if you suspect abuse and really suspect it and have a suspicion, you need to make the phone call. It is so important. You just cannot let it slide. You could save a child's life, right? We could all save a child's life if we just pay attention, know the signs and symptoms of abuse of all types, and then know how to report it and be ready to report it if a child discloses to you that they are being abused, right? So important. So have a great night, everybody. Take care of yourselves. I'll be back on tomorrow morning with one child abuse survivor to another, 6 o'clock a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So have a great night, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.